Welcome back to Squawk Box. Our next guest is Pershing Square CEO Bill Ackman. He has been one of the most outspoken voices against anti-Semitism on college campuses in America. He's also pushed for 3 university presidents to resign since that Capitol Hill hearing early last month, during which those leaders were widely seen as not defending their Jewish student populations. 2 university presidents did resign. One of them, now former Harvard leader Claudine Gay, became embroiled in a plagiarism scandal, a topic which has now touched on Ackman's own family. Bill Ackman is here, and this is your first major television interview since this all began. We did talk once briefly on Squawk. I think you had called in to talk about what was happening, but in the past couple of weeks...
That was about DEI, though.
That was about DEI, but over the past couple of weeks, you have been active throughout on X, outspoken on all of these issues, especially as there have now been attacks against your wife around the idea of plagiarism. I want to sort of just untangle all of this, because I think people are trying to understand what is motivating you, how this all began, what you're trying to do. There are issues about DEI and free speech and other things as well. But you have become one of the most influential, provocative, and polarizing voices in this debate. So let's start with where this began back in October for you.
It actually began before October, and it began in this room. You know, this is our boardroom at Pershing Square. It also happens to be the place we host our Pershing Square Foundation board meetings, a board that my father was a member of. And literally every meeting, my dad would say, "Bill, you're just not doing enough about anti-Semitism. I think it's a really important problem. You need to focus on it." And I was very dismissive of my dad. I love my father. He passed away in May.
You dismissed your dad when he said that?
I said, look, the Jews are doing great. I'm not experiencing, I don't see Jews experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism. And we focus on economic empowerment. We focus on enhancing people's ability to, 1-acre farmers in Kenya, things like this. And then Dad had heart surgery coming up, and he was very concerned about it because it was kind of life or death. And he wrote me 3 letters. One was, here are my instructions. If I die, memorial service, etc. This is what I want you to do with your mom, financial estate planning. The third one was like a long letter about anti-Semitism. He said, look, Bill, I want my last words to you to be, this is something you need to focus on. And I didn't do anything, to be honest. And then October 7th happened. And it was really October 8th. And it was when 30-odd Harvard student organizations, my alma mater, came out and said, the morning after the most horrendous, barbaric terrorist acts in history, at least in modern history for sure, they came out and said, you know what, it's Israel's fault. Israel's solely responsible for these horrendous, heinous acts. And then that was the beginning of this journey. Yeah.
And you have taken, dare I say, an activist approach to this.
Yes.
You've also been criticized for the activist approach. There's been some who have been very praiseworthy of what you have done in terms of pushing on these issues. But at the same time, there has also been a remarkable backlash. And we're now seeing that backlash manifest itself in the attack on your wife as it relates to accusations of plagiarism.
Yes.
How has that made you feel? And has it changed your view about how to approach these things? Because there's some who say this was really great what you were doing, but there's others who say that you have taken it to some degree too far. And in fact, by being such a big figure in this conversation, that it actually has made it harder to get what you want.
I disagree. Actually, I think, first of all, if you're going to go out there in the public eye and you're going to make statements, strong ones, about issues that are controversial, you're going to be criticized. Hopefully, you're going to be applauded as well. When they go after your wife, you know that you're making some progress. I mean, I feel very, the worst of this is for Neri, who did no wrong, who said nothing really publicly. But it means we've kind of hit a chord, if you will. Look, I talked about it, it started with anti-Semitism on campus. Then I got concerned about governance at Harvard. Not just the president, but when the board, in my view, didn't do the right thing. Then I broader concerns about higher education generally, and then the origins of anti-Semitism on campus, I think, which are result from the so-called DEI movement. I think these are very important issues, and these are issues that will require resources to be focused upon. And I would say, I was extraordinarily committed before. I'm undeterred. Actually, I'm standing up an organization very shortly to focus on precisely this.
What's that organization going to do?
It's going to be, I would say, the problem with think tanks is they write a bunch of papers, nothing happens. I would say it's going to be a think and do tank. It's going to be an activist. We're going to study these issues, and we're going to come up with solutions to problems, and we're going to implement.
And what are those issues as you see them? This is about anti-Semitism, or this is about free speech, or this is about DEI, or this is about governance, or plagiarism?
All the above. All the above. So, I have a day job, Pershing Square, my job I love. And at the early days of Pershing Square, I paid my own bills. But you know what? That's not a good use of my time, so I hired some people to do that. I used to do all of my own philanthropy, but that started to become a bigger responsibility, so I set up a foundation, have a board of directors, hired a team. This, I've done other initiatives like this. You and I were on TV to talk about child sex trafficking and visas, providing the payment rails, if you will, for pornography sites, or YouPorn. And it was a 30-minute interview and a few tweets.
Yep. This
is a bigger project, and it's now, this kind of activism now requires, sort of a serious team. We've got some extra space. I'll rent some space. I'll hire some people, hire a CEO, put together a board of directors, and we're going to go after these issues in a very aggressive way.
I think there's a lot of people who are watching you write on X, almost by the hour, constantly. Can you just take us inside both your own head on this, your home, what this has felt like? Because there's an interesting dynamic at play, which is you have long been somebody who has attacked others in the context of activism. And now, in some cases, arguably, you are being attacked. And your family's being attacked.
I was attacked before. Remember, if you're an activist short seller, you undergo the most aggressive attacks. So I'm kind of a battle-hardened person, right? MBIA tried to put me out of business. They did a pretty good job. Sicking Elliot Spitzer on me years ago, if you remember that one. And then, of course, Herbalife was a, to the end of the earth campaign, I would say, on both sides.
Is this different?
Yes. It's much more important, much more profound. It affects many more people. It's not just about a company, right? It's about society. It's about education. It's about free speech. It's about, not just higher education. It's about nursery school to, K through 12 education.
But take us inside your home, because part of this is about your wife.
Yes.
And about these allegations of plagiarism.
Yes.
One of the things that you did in the context of going after Claudine Gay was originally it was about anti-Semitism, then turned into an argument about governance and plagiarism on her side.
Sure. Actually, it was always about, I would say, leadership. And its lack of leadership, in my opinion, led to what started out as protests against Israel, then became protests that turned into anti-Semitic activity on campus. And I think that really that transformation happened because of a lack of leadership, a lack of enforcement of rules. And that's really ultimately lack of moral clarity. The catalytic moment where I said she should resign. And by the way, I said she should resign. I said President McGill should resign. Right? President Kornbluth at MIT should resign. And I'll point out, one of them is black, one is Jewish, Christian. This was a diverse collection of people. Although they were all women.
But there have been people that have accused you of being racist in the context of Claudine Gay.
Unfortunately, today, if you criticize a person of color, regardless of the credibility of your accusations, you're going to be accused of being racist, and that's not right. Right? I'm an equal opportunity criticizer, but I do want to get to the topic of. Let me explain. So that was the catalytic moment, and then that was December 10th, or December 9th, that congressional hearing. And 2 days later, the Harvard board said, we're unanimously in support of President Gay. And then this whole plagiarism thing kind of erupted. It was sort of out there, and then more and more findings were found. And I reposted these findings, because at that point, I was happy for her to leave for any reason, right? I had failed to convince this board on leadership, on moral clarity, on anti-Semitism on campus. And then this plagiarism thing started to get some legs, and it's not like I discouraged it. It was not I didn't look for it. It was found by others. But in fact, I thought it was disappointing that what the perception that the catalyst for the resignation was plagiarism, as opposed to a failure to address anti-Semitism.
Well, let me ask you about the plagiarism charge, though, however.
Sure.
Which is now that you have been on the other side and your wife is being accused of plagiarism herself.
Sure.
And you have disputed that it is plagiarism. You've argued around the idea and the definition of plagiarism. What does it mean to be able to cite somebody but not necessarily put quote marks around it? This is something that Business Insider has accused your wife of. But Business Insider has also tried to argue that effectively it's very similar to what Claudine Gay had been doing. Do you have a different view now of this?
Sure. So plagiarism is fraud in an academic context. It's the most aggressive, the most damaging thing you can do to a professor, other than accusing them of some kind of, rape or some kind of sexual harassment or some kind of violent crime. So it's maybe slightly better than that. So it's a very serious crime. And it is, for that reason, when a professor is accused of plagiarism, it's a very serious process that goes underway to determine whether or not it's plagiarism. Now, it doesn't take 6 months, which is a typical period for assessing whether a professor has committed plagiarism, to determine whether they had a footnote or quotation marks. It's about intent. Did the professor intentionally steal someone else's ideas? And one of the indicia, if you will, of plagiarism is, where they're using someone else's words or they're not putting a footnote. The question is that an oversight or is that intentionally theft? And the things that you want to look at in determining whether or not it was intentional or not, you're trying to get into the mind of the person, is how pervasive is it, right? And I don't know today whether Claudine Gay committed plagiarism or not, because I haven't done a 6-month assessment of.
But you were out there on Twitter saying she plagiarized. She shouldn't. Not only should she not be the president of the university, when in fact she stepped down and they made her a member of the faculty. You raised questions about that based on the plagiarism accusation itself.
What I said was, in light of what has been revealed about her academic record and what we've learned about plagiarism, I don't think she's qualified to serve on the faculty. And one of the things that came out, which I had never focused on Claudine Gay's academic record or plagiarism. But what I learned sort of after the fact is that she published 11 articles, not a dissertation, 11 articles in journals. And if you look at what's required to be a professor at Harvard, if you're in the field of social sciences, that's a very, very small, very limited academic record. 6 of those 11 papers had 51 missing quotations, if you will, words. Still, I would say that doesn't look good. And there was a point in which, her accusers were people who had been plagiarized from. This woman, Carol Swain, kind of a noted, member of a faculty, professor, academic in her same field, said she took my work. Right. So that's maybe and it was those words plus the record. I'm saying that you're rewarding her with a $900,000 a year professorship. I mean, the reality was that was a legal settlement. So I said so. But my activism on Claudine Gay, I don't want to distract from the fact that it was about, and just yesterday, and I just tweeted this out, there was a 73-page complaint kind of leveled at Harvard. I encourage everyone to read it, and it outlines some of the things I'd seen when I went up to campus and learned about, but it's basically 50 pages of anti-Semitic acts on campus. It's a bit like New York City. When New York City was a crime-infested place, and Giuliani showed up, the good version of Giuliani, he instituted what people called the kind of the broken windows sort of theory. He cracked down on even small violations like the squeegee guys. What happened at Harvard is the protesters kind of tested the administration. And then incrementally, they started violating more and more and more rules, and there were no consequences. And that's why they felt comfortable going into University Hall.
You are now planning to, if you haven't already begun, effectively scrubbing the records of professors everywhere, especially at MIT, because you believe that's where the accusations against your wife came from.
No, that's to make a point. Okay, so just briefly on plagiarism. So plagiarism is fraud. It depends on the intent and the degree to some extent. And getting back to Neri. So Neri's thesis, 330 pages. Business Insider found 4 paragraphs, where she had used words and gave proper attribution without quotation marks, 4. And then 1 sentence where she missed an attribution. By the way, the same person whom she missed an attribution for, she referenced 8 other times and properly referenced that person. So again, stick with me, Andrew. It's important. It's my wife. Okay. So if I'm an academic panel assessing this, I would say, out of the 2,700, paragraphs, 4 she had attribution, clearly not theft of intellectual property. There's nothing special about those words. It's not like quoting Shakespeare. Okay. And there was 1 sentence. No one's going to conclude that that's fraud. Fraud requires scienter, intent, It's not even an important part of her thesis. right? So that's nary. The problem with plagiarism, though, and the point I was making, is it can be weaponized, right? We're going to know, once we finish this review, how many other members of the MIT faculty have this problem. And if it's plagiarism, because we find a dozen paragraphs without attribution and 300 other members of the faculty, it makes no sense. So what has to happen, to be clear, one of the things our little institute kind of focus on, we should impanel a group of top scholars, and let's come up with a definition of plagiarism that's consistent with what makes sense. And we're proving a point by showing, if the standard is we find a missed footnote, you are a plagiarizer. Again, what Business Insider said is we found 4 paragraphs and a footnote, so Neri Oxman's dissertation is marred by plagiarism. And then when Neri said, they're right, there were 4 paragraphs and 1 sentence, the next story they wrote, it was Neri Oxman admits to plagiarism. She didn't admit to plagiarism. She admitted to basically a few clerical errors in a 30-page document. Okay.
Are you going to sue Business Insider, which we should say is owned by KKR, Henry Kravis, and you made calls, given your stature in the world and your relationships with some of these people, that most people have no access to when an article is published about them that they don't like?
Well, the first thing I did was call someone I knew on the Business Insider board. But again, this is why we're going to stand up this organization, because unfortunately, I'm not the first person that Business Insider, or my wife is not the first person that they've gone after falsely accusing them of something criminal, okay, or fraud, accusing my wife of fraud. The Twitter, if you will, or X is littered with, everyone in the world has talked to me.
But they've accused you of being a racist. They've accused you of being a liar. People have accused you of fraud. You care about free speech.
I do, but let me just, first of all, accusing someone of fraud is a very serious thing, okay? But you're right. The average guy is not going to pick up the phone and call Henry Kravis on his cell phone or text him, which I did, okay? And it shouldn't have to be that I call Henry Kravis. It shouldn't have to be that
What did Henry Kravis tell you?
I didn't reach him, so I sent him a text.
Okay.
And I sent him a text saying, I'd like to talk to you about something. It's all outlined in my TikTok. If you read it. And then I spoke to a member of the board of Business Insider, and he calmed me down. He said, "Oh, they're doing an investigation. I totally agree with you that plagiarism is not a series of clerical errors. In fact, I have this in a text in my little TikTok." So I thought, okay. I said, "Look, my only request is either withdraw the stories or announce that you're investigating them." And he said, "I'll get back to you." But let me get back to my point. Yes, I have the ability to reach out to a lot of people. I'm one person removed, or I know them directly. But a lot of people's lives have been destroyed by media organizations writing a story that destroys their reputation, and they have no recourse. And that is a very, very bad way for the world to operate. And in a world where online media, the compensation for media is based on clicks, right? The more attention you get, the more you can sell your advertising for. And that model drives people to do sensationalist stories with high-profile people where they can say they commit crimes, or with the wives of high-profile people.
What about the facts themselves? And I just want to read you. This is Axel Springer, spokesperson, talking to Puck yesterday, saying most people underestimated the way that Bill Ackman is completely losing it. That's what he said about you.
Yes.
And went on to say that the facts of the story stand. Their argument, I believe, is that the facts are the facts. There's a question potentially about the motivations which you've raised about the editors and the reporters who may have pursued that story.
I love that statement. Let me tell you why I love that statement. Business Insider is a wholly owned subsidiary of Axel Springer. It's probably a several $100 million entity. Axel Springer is a multi-billion-dollar entity. When Axel Springer says the facts in the Business Insider story are correct, after I put out my 6,000 word thing outlining why the facts are false, the most material is Neri Oxman admitted to plagiarism. Neri Oxman never admitted to plagiarism, okay? Axel Springer is now a recourse party if there is a lawsuit, which is where you started your question. I hope we don't end up there.
We're going to take a pause in this conversation because we have some data that's coming out, but we're going to come back to this conversation. We're going to continue to talk about the world of activism, the political prism I want to talk to you about with which a lot of this is being looked at, DEI issues, and how you have thought about the shift in all of this. So stay where you are. I'm going to send it right now, if I could, back to Joe And we'll come back with Bill Ackman in just a little bit. Welcome back to Squawk Box. We're continuing our conversation with Pershing Square CEO Bill Ackman. Bill, thank you for being here. Want to just talk briefly, though, about the markets before we get back to the Henry Kravis and plagiarism and free speech and anti-Semitism issues. You just saw that data come across the tape.
Yes.
Where are you in terms of the markets right now and what you think is happening or not happening?
So on the bond markets, I don't know if you remember, I tweeted that at 5%, I thought the 30-year had kind of gone far enough. We actually reversed our position and went, instead of being short the bond market, we went long the 5-year and the 1-year, again, through these sort of asymmetric instruments at that time. You know, rates have come in a lot. Right. We've kept that position on because we believe rates are going to come in further. I think the data point that came out this morning is sort of confirmatory.
Do you think there's 3 rate cuts in the offing now? 4? By the way, we had Larry Fink on in the 6 o'clock hour. He actually thought that we may not get those 3 rate cuts. Maybe it's 2.
Yeah, I think he's wrong. I think we have 3, or certainly, remember, 3 rate cuts is 75 basis points off of, call it 5 1/4, 5 1/2. That's not a significant move. You know, 3 rate cuts would be like a 15% reduction in rates. Right now, we're, with inflation, cooling very meaningfully, the real cost of money is very high right now. So I think they're going to have to move early, and I think they're going to have to move.
So what does that mean?
It could certainly do more than 3 cuts.
What does that mean both to equities but to the larger economy as we look? Remember, we're in a presidential election year.
Yeah. So I think it's good for equities as long as they bring rates down fast enough to avoid a meaningful recession.
By the way, talking just for a moment, because I mentioned the presidential election, you have been quite active online about the election. At one point, you were supporting or at least talking about Vivek Ramaswamy, who I appears no longer in the game. But you've also talked, you've been a longtime Democrat, and you've been quite outspoken, it seems, against President Biden. And I think a lot of people are trying to understand your politics today, given sort of where things have moved here.
Sure. So one, I've always been a centrist, always believed in supporting who's ever best for the country, Republican, Independent, Democrat. I think it's really important that Biden steps aside, says he's going to step down. I think he's, just on the age past his prime issue. I think a good part of the reason why we have what's going on in the world geopolitically is he's perceived as a weak president, and he will be even weaker in a year.
Does that mean that you would vote for former President Trump against President Biden right now?
I'll make that decision when I have the choice. But I would say what I'm hugely in favor of, and actually coming here right after this interview, is Dean Phillips. He's going to meet with the whole organization. Dean, a lot of people know who Dean Phillips is. He's a 3-term congressman from Minnesota, considered one of the most bipartisan congressmen, super capable, entrepreneur, Belvedere vodka, that kind of high-end, what's it called, sorbet. But stick with me for a second. He's gone to 26% approval, or 26% of the vote poll in New Hampshire, from nothing in a very short period of time. He's someone people need to take a look at. If Biden steps away, I'd love a world in which, imagine a world in which we have a capable, young, great, motivated, energetic person on the Democratic ticket, and we had something, something similar on the Republican ticket, and you went to the polls, and you weren't sure who to vote for because they were both outstanding candidates. I think Phillips could be very interesting on the Democratic side. And my hope for Vivek was he was going to be that person on the Republican side. I expect he might surprise people. People think he's out of the race. Maybe. But I think Haley is someone, what's interesting, I think, about Haley, and what I think is interesting about Phillips, is that I think Democrats and Republicans can support either of those 2 candidates.
But does that mean that you're anybody but Biden at this point? And the reason I ask is you've also talked, I think, about former President Trump being dangerous historically. And so now you sound open to voting for former President Trump.
My goal right now is to have good alternatives to Trump and Biden. That's my goal.
But if those are the choices,
I'll make my decision then based on the state of the world. But I can't imagine Biden. I'm stunned that he hasn't said he's stepping aside, and that is very, very. He will lose.
Fair to think that that's a vote for Trump.
Trump will be our next president if Biden is the candidate, for sure. And I think, as Neil Ferguson says, he says if Biden is president. We're in a very, stick with me. His view is the U.S. is at grave risk with Biden staying as president geopolitically, but the Constitution's fine. With Trump as president, he'll keep us safe, but the Constitution's at risk. That's the choice.
Do you think your politics historically, which have leaned to the left, have been a mistake. And I ask because part of the whole political prism with which the arguments around anti-Semitism and DEI and freedom of speech on campus and in bigger institutions is now seen that way. Do you think you made a mistake?
I think that what the Democratic Party, what left means today, is not a party I want to be associated with. And I think that's been a big. I was a Bill Clinton Democrat, and what the party has sort of morphed to is not something I want anything to do with.
Do you want to have something to do with the Republican Party?
I don't want to be part of a party. I like being in the center, and picking the right candidate. I'm tired of the country being about right and left. I want it to be about what's right for the country.
Right. Before our conversation was paused earlier,
yes.
We were about to talk about Henry Kravis, these accusations about Business Insider, which KKR owns, and whether you're going to sue them and sue him.
Yeah.
Do you?
Not suing Henry Kravis. Let me just be clear. Business Insider put out this story. Okay, it's a rogue news organization. Okay, that's what they are. I mean, check around. You probably know this already. They're owned by Axel Springer, which is the CEO of which is a real guy. Okay, I've had 6 or 7 people close to me call me and say, Matthias, who's CEO, I think that's your computer ringing.
Yep.
Embarrassing for an anchor. You're supposed to be good at this. By the way, if that's plagiarism, you're toast.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, small little error. Where were we?
You were talking about Henry Kravis. You were talking about Business Insider.
So my point is, Axel Springer, I thought was a legitimate company. Matthias is supposed to be a fantastic person, but they're the control person, right? They own 100%, or whatever management owns. They own substantially all of Business Insider. They're responsible for Business Insider's acts. And the best evidence of that is they put out this story. We've disputed it. They've confirmed that it's.
But do you think? I guess my question is: do you think?
So my point here is
this differently? By the way, I've written articles over the years.
Yes.
That you have objected to vehemently. We've had disagreements about those articles, and you have felt, in certain cases, that they were unfair. I remember those conversations.
Okay.
Is this different to you?
Yes.
And is it different because of the facts, or is it different because it's your wife?
It's different because of the facts, and also because it's my wife. But let's put it this way. If you wrote a story saying Bill Ackman admitted to insider trading, which is the academic equivalent of what they said about my wife,
right?
I would call you. But if you didn't change the story, I would go to your editor. If your editor wouldn't fix it, I would go to the president. Right. I would go to the ultimate control person. And that's what I've done here. First, we object to the story to the Business Insider people. And when they do nothing, then we complain to the Axel Springer management team or the board. And when they do nothing, then at the end of the day, Henry Kravis controls 48% of the vote of this company. With a phone call, he could fix this. So yes, the fact that this has gone on, it's now a week since this, more than a week. Thursday was the beginning when they said that her thesis was marred by plagiarism. Neri Oxman's thesis is marred by fraud. That's what they said. And then the second story was Neri Oxman admits to fraud, i.e. plagiarism, right? The third story is like, we found a bunch of other examples which are completely fictitious examples.
You have said that family is off limits. And that's something you took to Twitter and you said historically business people are not supposed to go after family.
Yes.
And yet there are numerous instances where you have gone after members of families as part of some of this activism, including around the universities. I want to just read you. This is Kara Swisher. On X. She says, A-OK to attack the wives of MIT folks, we can get into this in a sec, of course, or talk about people being fired from jobs like it's a human hunt. And when economically attractive pals like Elon, go after House speakers or the husbands of House speakers, file all of this, she effectively says, under closeted billionaire cosplaying tough guy, getting a taste of the endless, I won't use the word, that rains down here on the rest of us serfs 24/7. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I've not gone after anyone's wife. I thought she's talking about Elon Musk.
I don't think she's talking about Elon Musk. She's talking about at MIT, one of the board members, the chair of the board. You have effectively said that the chair was funneling money illegally, at least for tax purposes.
Let me summarize. I can help you. I know the story better than you. Okay, so the chairman of MIT is a guy named Mark Gorenberg. Mark Gorenberg, so I had a MIT member of the faculty shared with me. He said, Bill, do you think this is unusual? MIT is the only funder of this nonprofit the CEO of which is the wife of the chairman of MIT. The chairman of MIT is the treasurer of this organization, and MIT in their 990 is listed, that's their IRS disclosure, as the only funder. I said, Bill, what's with this? I took a look at it, and I said, how can this be? I tweeted about it. And then a spokesperson said, well, no, that's the MIT Donor Advised Fund. And Mr. Gorenberg funded the money to the Donor Advised Fund, and the Donor Advised Fund funded the money to his wife's charity.
Now, basically, it means it's going after the wife.
No, hold on.
It's going to impact the wife.
No, unless she's involved in the business. She is involved in the business, okay? The business, by the way, and this is some little scoop we figured out recently, I haven't gotten around to tweeting about it, the business is a DEI consultant, a nonprofit DEI consultant. The wife also owns, apparently, a for-profit company. So the DEI consultant determines whether, or the nonprofit determines whether, you're supposed to sign a pledge saying you're going to keep various DEI things, a bit like companies that run around asking for an ESG pledge. And then they have a service, which is a for-profit service, where they sell you products, services, software, or otherwise to enable you to fix your DEI problem, right? This is the chairman of MIT, and unfortunately, his wife, who is the CEO of this business. The purpose here, I'm not interested in the wife, but the wife is inextricably involved here. And the reason why this is tax fraud and has other problems is when you give money to a donor advised fund, the donor advised fund is not allowed to give money to something affiliated to the donor. So that's problem number one. The problem number two is that this is MIT, right? MIT sponsors a couple of donor advised funds, and the goal is to get donors to give money to MIT affiliated things, and then also occasionally other things. This, a Fidelity donor advised fund, you could never do this. And the benefit to him is his wife, even though MIT DAF is the only funder of his wife's charity, he couldn't give money directly and get the same tax deduction. That's the problem. So I attacked the chairman of MIT. I thought it was fair game, okay, in light of what's going on. And he's putting at risk the tax-exempt status of the donor advised fund.
Larger question, though, about your role as both a donor, an influential figure in these instances. There are some people who look at this and say, what does Bill Ackman have? What is his right to be involved in any of this? Maybe as a shareholder you are, but should we be listening to the quote-unquote billionaire class, right? You've seen this critique. Should we be listening to these people over these people? And should the academics have more freedom and have more freedom from the money? Okay. What do you make of that?
Sure. So,
and by the way, this is becoming a bigger issue at Harvard now. I want to get into the Harvard endowment in a moment, because that's the next piece of the campaign that you're going after.
So the answer is, if you don't want to listen to me, don't follow me. That's number one. The reason why I can speak freely, and this is an unfortunate thing about society today, if you say something that offends someone, you can lose your job. You can get blackballed. You can get canceled. It happens on universities. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of being canceled. I'm not afraid of losing my job. And financial independence gives me the wherewithal to speak. And by the way, I've literally gotten thousands of emails, texts, letters. I can walk you back to my office and show you some of them. I get them. They come in every day. Okay, piles of them. Okay, people saying, Bill, thank you for speaking on behalf of all of us. And my biggest driver in life, I should have answered your question differently. This started pretty close to when I was 18. Biggest driver was independence. I wanted to be able to speak freely, live my life, and that motivated me to be successful. And I argue with success also comes responsibility. If I see something that's a problem in society, I want to do something about it. And there are a lot of people who have a lot of money, a lot of resources. You know what? They sit on their yacht, which is fine, and they live their life, and no one's going to criticize them. Or maybe they catch them on the yacht, they'll criticize them, right? In my case, I want to, when I'm 85, looking back, I want to say, you know what? I helped solve a number of important problems. If you can't tell by now, I'm a fixer, okay, right? What is shareholder activism? It's fixing companies. What is this? Helping to fix universities. It's all the same.
Okay, let me just have one more question about that, and then I want to talk about the Harvard endowment, which is, if you go back, you have a track record in which you fix things, and sometimes you fix them and you win in a very big way. You also fail in a big way, too, right? You could even argue that you're somebody who hits Grand Slam home runs, but also has a whole bunch of strikeouts throughout the process.
Actually, I don't think it's accurate. If you look back at our history, we've had some big losses, sure, but the successes vastly overwhelm the failures. Like the success rate is extremely high, and you should look at our record over time. So Valiant and Herbalife,
Right.
Disaster. Okay. JCPenney, smaller disaster. Try to name 10. Right. We've made 100 investments. Well, more than 100.
Let's talk about the next fight that it appears to be on your hands, which is that you are supporting, I think, at least the reports have been, that you're supporting an overthrow of the folks who control the endowment at Harvard.
Not accurate. So Harvard has a board of directors that elects itself. This is the most important board. It's the corporation board, called the Fellows of Harvard. They really control who's the president. Then there's a group of alums that are part of something called the Board of Overseers, about 30 or 32 of those. Each year, there are 5 or 6 seats that come up for election. In light of everything that's gone down on campus, a group of 4 alumni, a very, very impressive group, Navy SEAL, Marine, Navy, all military people, but also brilliant. I know one of them, a guy named Alec Williams, Princeton, and he did a joint degree at Harvard Business School and Yale while he was going to Afghanistan. Okay, like super impressive guy. They're very unhappy with what's going on the Harvard campus, and they need 3,200 signatures. By the way, if you're a Harvard alum, go sign up and back their campaign, and they're going to put themselves up for election to be on the Board of Overseers, which doesn't have a lot of control. But the benefit of supporting them is it sends this incredible message to Harvard. It gives them a mandate to look at things, and their platform includes one of the issues they're concerned about is the Harvard endowments earned something like a 4.5% compounded return for a decade in one of the best bull markets in history. I'm not allowed to disclose what our record has been during the period, but the Harvard endowment would probably be, $500 billion or something had they invested in Pershing instead of whatever they invested in. And so they're going to look into that.
So you think what are you suggesting?
Well, since we, what's interesting about being in the position we're in is we get inbounds. I'll share a couple of interesting inbounds, and I guess the world will tell you whether they're true or not. So Harvard lost, apparently, $1 billion on a fraudulent situation.
What fraudulent situation?
Apparently, they bought like a forest in the Amazon from Brazil. And they included in their returns mark-to-market gains on the forest. Right. But apparently, they relied on marks each year from the person who sold them the forest, kept telling them that it was increasing in value. Until at some point, bad things happened, it blew up and went to zero, and they had to write it off completely. At that point, it was worth over $1 billion. So the employees who were getting paid incentives based on the increased value of this forest benefited, and then Harvard took a huge wipeout. That's never been disclosed publicly. Again, I have no...
We're going to have to fact check that.
We're going to have to fact check that. I'm saying this is something I heard from a very, very credible source. That's one. The second one I heard was that a president of Harvard had a view on interest rates and decided and told the endowment to make a derivative bet on rates, and that bet lost $1 billion. So I got a couple of
I want to follow up on that. I'm a little anxious about putting that out there in the public without being able to fact check that in real time.
Well, by the way, Harvard's not a publicly traded thing. You don't have to worry. Harvard should put out a statement. Is it true that the president of Harvard did a derivative trade, in fact, caused the endowment to do a derivative trade that lost money on rates, about $1 billion or anything close to it? And is it true that Harvard had an investment in a forest in South America or otherwise that they marked to market each year? They paid a few $100 million for it, increased in value to something approaching $1 billion, and they were forced to write it off. Let's ask the question instead of presenting it as fact.
We got to wrap up, but I
have so much more to say.
I know you do. I just want to end with this. When all this is said and done,
yes,
do you want to be known as an activist investor? Do you want to be known as something else? I think there's a real question, sort of, who Bill Ackman is supposed to be in all of this in the end.
Sure. I want to be known as a good person who cares about society, a patriotic person who loves his country, a loyal alum that wants to help its university, a loving husband who wants to take care of my beautiful wife, and someone who really cares about the truth and is prepared to go all in when important things show up and I have the ability to affect change.
Bill Ackman, thank you very, very much for the conversation today. Thank you.